My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is August 2nd, 2025. It is 3:52 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights from the past 24 hours. The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed to hear a major Voting Rights Act case reviewing whether a Louisiana redistricting map violates the 1965 law by unjustly prioritizing race. Civil rights groups warn that this could erode one of the act's most vital protections if upheld. A joint advisory from the FBI and DHS flags rising threats to judges, election workers, and health officials, especially within swing states. This highlights escalating political tensions around the 2026 election cycle. A Harvard investigation revealed that Trump's aggressive rhetoric has spurred intensifying intimidation campaigns against election administrators. Federal and local law enforcement responses remain limited. Policy shifts in institutional power. An investigative report highlights how executive actions by the Trump administration have pressured major law firms to reduce pro bono legal work in civil rights, immigration, and LGBTQ cases. 9 firms responded by aligning with the administration's directives, pledging nearly $1 billion in casework supportive of federal agendas, raising alarms among legal advocates over diminished public interest representation. Consumer Infrastructure Watch, new tariffs announced. The U.S. imposed significantly higher tariffs up to 50% on goods from Brazil, India, Taiwan, and South Africa, including copper, plumbing, and wiring components. Observers warn these could drive up costs for consumers while disrupting supply chains in industries like construction, energy, and electronics. Public health, no major outbreak or public health policy updates surfaced in the past 24 hours. However, previously reported controversies surrounding vaccine policy and staffing cuts at the CDC remain unresolved, contributing to ongoing public skepticism of federal disease prevention infrastructure. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff visited Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu along with locations served by the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF. The foundation has drawn UN criticism after reports of over 1,000 Palestinians dying while trying to access aid. Witkoff reaffirmed U.S. support for joint plans to disarm Hamas and negotiate hostage releases. Separately, Canada reported potential withdrawal from trade talks in Washington, citing the U.S. imposition of new tariffs as the driving factor behind escalating tensions ahead of negotiations. Here are today's U.S. equity ETF closing values, followed by the latest trade and economic highlights. Major indexes plunged sharply on August 1st. All 3 benchmarks posted steep losses. The Dow fell 1.2%, down 542 points to 43,588.58. The S&P dropped 1.6%, a 101-point decline to 6,238.01. And the Nasdaq sank 2.2%, 472-point fall to 20,650.13. These were the largest declines for the S&P and Nasdaq since early summer and for Dow in over a month. Labor data disappointment. The U.S. added just 73,000 jobs in July, far below projections. Revised data slashed May and June labor gains by 250,000. The unemployment rate ticked up to 4.2%, while wage growth remained steady around 3.7%, still above the 2.4% inflation rate. Surging tariff anxiety, President Trump issued sweeping new tariffs affecting roughly 68 countries, spanning up to 41% on Canadian imports and major duties on goods from Brazil, India, Taiwan, and more. The looming August 7th enforcement date stoked global trade fears. Corporate weakness after earnings. Amazon shares plunged over 8% despite strong earnings as its cloud unit results disappointed. Apple fell 2.5%, and other tech giants like Nvidia, Meta, and Tesla also declined sharply amid broader market drag. Flight to safety reflected in bond markets as stocks dropped. U.S. Treasury yields declined significantly, indicating investor retreat to safer assets. Concurrently, the CBOE Volatility Index surged to a 6-week high. Consumer confidence in markets is weakening amid signs of economic slowdown, rising tariffs, and corporate caution. The sharp decline in job growth combined with aggressive trade policy has disrupted market sentiment. The sharp bond yield drop suggests investors are already pricing in more economic risk ahead, with markets now betting on possible Fed rate cut in September. Here are the U.S. trade and economic highlights from the past 24 hours. Real quick, we're just going to take a look and get a visual on what the stock market looked like closing this yesterday. This is the stock market close. We are looking at the S&P 500. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And this is Invesco QQQ. New reciprocal tariffs roll out on August 1st. President Trump signed an executive order officially launching a series of reciprocal tariffs on imports from more than 60 countries. Tariff rates range from 10% to 41%, including 35% on Canadian goods, 25% on Indian exports, 20% on Taiwanese products, and 30% on South African items. The move prompted modest market declines amid warnings of higher consumer prices and further supply chain disruption. The Budget Lab at Yale projects a 1.8% rise in overall consumer price levels, which translates to roughly $2,400 in additional household expenses annually from the new tariffs. Key consumer categories like food, clothing, and consumer goods are expected to be the most affected. The U.S. dollar posted its best weekly performance of 2025, gaining nearly 2.5% as markets digested trade clarity and growing inflation signals. Asian equity indices declined moderately amid trade fears, while gold fell close to 1%, pressured by a strong dollar and steady Fed policy. Inflation trends and Fed response. Core goods inflation, as seen in June's PCE data, rose by 0.3%, marking the fastest monthly increase in 5 months. The standard inflation gauge, PCE, now sits around 2.8% year over year, fueling concerns that tariffs may stoke inflation further. The Federal Reserve maintained rates at 4.25% and 4.50%, with dissent from 2 Trump-appointed governors who voted for immediate cuts, reflecting internal friction over balancing inflation risk versus recession danger. A Reuters poll among economists estimates that the aggressive tariff lift raises the probability of a recession to 45% within the next year, down from 25% earlier in 2025. The growth forecast has been revised from around 2% to just 1.4% in 2025, emphasizing growing caution in investment and hiring plans. Sectoral supply pressures, copper tariffs 50%, and restriction on copper scrap exports are expected to significantly raise costs for U.S. manufacturers and home builders, potentially increasing construction and consumer prices in related sectors. Many Fortune 500 companies, including Adidas, Walmart, and Amazon, have publicly flagged mounting cost pressures from tariffs and regulatory uncertainty that may escalate into consumer price hikes or profit margin compression. According to an EY analysis, U.S. GDP growth is expected to decelerate sharply in the second half of 2025 from 2.8% earlier in the year to around 0.8% year over year by quarter 4. Lower consumer demand, trade instability, and delayed business investment are cited as key headwinds. New tariffs have reshaped trade dynamics with major partners and are expected to add 2 to 3% to household expenses over time. Inflation is trending upward in core goods categories, pushing the Fed. New tariffs have reshaped trade dynamics with major partners and are expected to add 2 to 3% to household expenses over time. Inflation is trending upward in core goods categories, pushing the Fed to maintain rates despite lagging growth. Consumer and investor sentiment is souring as recession risks climb to 45% and companies brace for longer-term volatility. Supply chain challenges are mounting, particularly in construction, technology, and retail sectors, facing new material and input costs. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow are up does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, or inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. Here is the hazardous weather outlook by region. Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, a stalled frontal boundary is generating repeated heavy thunderstorms across the Interstate 95 corridor. From Washington, D.C. through Philadelphia and New York City, rainfall rates may reach 3 inches per hour with flash flood watches in effect, particularly in urban zones prone to flooding. Some locals have a 70% chance of receiving 3 to 6 inches of rain, with isolated totals of up to 8 inches, prompting a state of emergency declaration for all 21 counties in New Jersey. Southeast and Gulf Coast, a slow-moving cold front laden with tropical moisture is expected to stall over the Carolinas and Georgia, maintaining a level 2 flood risk on a 4-level scale across coastal areas. Cities such as Charleston, Savannah, and Wilmington may see 2 to 5 inches of rain in localized bursts over a 6-hour period. The risk extends into Georgia coastal zones through the weekend. Central Plains and Midwest thunderstorms may develop as the front shifts inland. While widespread flash flooding is less likely here, localized heavy downpours, strong gusts, and hail remain possible. Wildfire smoke from Canadian and domestic wildfires continues to degrade air quality across parts of the upper Midwest, including Minnesota and Wisconsin. Poor conditions may persist until shifting winds provide relief. Southwest and Southern Plains, no significant precipitation threats in the near term. However, dry and hot conditions persist across Texas, Oklahoma, and the Southwest. Temperatures in Southern California are trending toward the high 90s, increasing heat stress risk, especially in inland valleys. A tight pressure gradient may lead to wind and marine advisories along the California coast. Safety and preparedness tips: flash flood threat, especially in the northeast and southeast. Stay alert and pay attention to warnings and avoid driving through flooded roadways. Overland and coastal storms, be prepared for localized flooding and wind gusts. Secure loose outdoor items and avoid flooded low-lying areas. Air quality alerts in Midwestern cities affected by wildfire smoke. People with respiratory conditions should limit outdoor activity and use air purifiers or masks. Heat hazards. Southwest areas should watch for heat advisories, drink water regularly, limit strenuous activity in midday, and seek shade or AC when possible. Marine safety. Users along the California Gulf Coast should monitor small craft advisories and avoid venturing into open waters during high wind periods. Here are the top international news highlights from the past 24 hours. Russia claims to have captured Chasiv Yar, I don't know if I'm saying that right, in eastern Ukraine. After nearly 16 months of conflict, Ukrainian President Zelensky rejected the claim as propaganda, citing ongoing battles near Pokrovsk and continued resistance efforts. Global security and diplomacy. U.S. deploys nuclear submarines in response to Russian escalation risk. President Trump ordered 2 ballistic missile subs to strategic regions following remarks by former Russian President Medvedev about potential nuclear conflict. South Asia. U.S. restricts official visits to certain Karachi hotels. The action follows a credible security threat targeting high-end accommodations in Pakistan's economic hub, prompting the State Department to limit movements of diplomats and personnel. Civilian impact and war costs. Rescue teams in Kiev have recovered 31 bodies after a Russian missile strike destroyed an apartment block, marking the deadliest assault on Ukraine's capital this year. Among the victims are 5 children, including a toddler. President Zelensky announced the operation's conclusion after more than 24 hours of recovery efforts. Germany's foreign minister has backtracked on earlier comments about recognizing a Palestinian state during a West Bank tour. German media reported the softened language follows criticism from Israeli leadership concerned about diplomatic repercussions. Why these things matter? The Chasiv Yar claim may signal shifts in battlefield momentum, but Ukrainian leadership maintains resistance is ongoing. Deploying U.S. nuclear submarines reflects elevated geopolitical stakes and heightened strategic deterrence posture. Tightened security protocols in Karachi underscore growing risks to U.S. stakeholders abroad amid regional tensions. The Kiev strike toll underscores civilian vulnerabilities in protracted air campaigns and underscores war impacts beyond the battlefield. Germany's softened rhetoric on state recognition signals continued diplomatic balancing as Middle East tensions intensify. My name's Waffles. This is the last 24 hours in the news. It is August 2nd, 2025, and it is 4:12 a.m. Mountain Standard Time.
So the Olympics is great, and Johnny for the others, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup, too. And, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. I got both of them. I got the Olympics, and I got the World Cup. And I said, it's too bad. One was in 2026, and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election, and now we won, so I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So, Johnny, thank you for the World Cup, and everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey, guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment on my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, because MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA. Abolish MAGA. Fuck you, MAGA.